All right. So, Nikki, what was your big discovery as far as the ignore?
I just had to add it to the prettier ignore file. Anything that had to do with the code editor languages.
Oh, so it was specifically in code editor. It was working on
all the little individual language files. It was recognizing them as bad JavaScript.
Was it code editor doing that, or was it code sample?
Good question. Let me go.
If it's code sample, you check that out. I was messing with code sample yesterday.
Oh, it was code sample, not code editor. My bad.
Okay, so in part we should ignore those, but also I went in and fixed the XML and the JavaScript one. So we had adopted code sample as part of Hacks, so you get those nice little snippets on the Hacks, the website. And then what I found is then when trying to build Storybook for transition of transitions, it would just panic on some random thing that was in that file. There was a dependency that had to do with the languages. And it was because the code sample project was compiling the highlight.js project. And it was compiling it so that it worked with, I don't know, some type of module system. There's like 3 types of module systems so that, we can bring Chuck and Nikki deeper into our hell Potter of 3 months ago. So the future that we're all banking on is ES modules, right? With the script type module syntax. However, forever now, you've been able to use things like Webpack to bundle all your stuff together and get a similar effect, but not actually be using that standard. So there's 2 other packaging formats that are really popular. There's universal module delivery. Is that what it is, Potter?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
UMD.
There's UMD and AMD. I feel like AMD is like anonymous module delivery or something like that. Can't remember the names, but basically they're just like multiple ways of doing what it is that script type modules does.
Universal module definition.
There we go. Universal module definition. So it was a way that you could still work on your projects in a modular fashion and then kind of smash them all together and resolve them. So the part of the problem that that we've been running into, and I noticed this with MathJax and with anything like that, right? Like that something that depends on a third-party library that was made, sometime in the last decade, probably, because then it takes a refactor to do ES modules. So you're finding these projects that used to be really easy to pull this stuff in because we're pulling it in with jQuery or whatever, that are kind of a pain in the butt now because they compiled for UMD and then your system is doing module loading, or they compiled for AMD and then you're trying to use the AMD and the UMD with your module one. So it usually doesn't manifest immediately, but it comes out in weird cryptic error messages in Webpack or Storybook.
So would you say that a lot of third-party plugins that we're going to run into issues with compilation is just because everybody is having these different ways of compiling, and we're not really seeing it with anything other than the third-party plugins because
Correct.
Of a bunch of nested dependencies.
Yeah, it's more of a historical type of thing, but we'll still definitely run into it from time to time. I was running into that with Ace Editor. So when we were using Ace, I was actually pulling Ace Editor's code in and directly using it. Because otherwise, if you get the package, it's compiled most likely to one of those formats. This is also why I have find a link for it. It's what there's ES module bridge or something that I wrote. Let's see if I find it. ES global bridge. It's in the LRN web components thing. Is there chatness? Oh, there is chatness. Okay. So it's in part why I wrote that a couple months ago. And all it's trying to do is attempt to give you a way that you could like import something, and it attaches it to the body of the document, and then it kind of executes a promise and an event so that you could say like, hey, the code I just attached is going to be attached to a window, right? So it's like global scope code, but yet I need to use it down in this ES module, which unfortunately isn't possible anymore.
Really?
Yeah, it's just not possible at all. As far as timing, because the ES modules, right? So when script type module runs, you got like all those things that resolve and come back to one source.
Mm-hmm.
And if you imagine you've got one dependency here and it's like, hey, just add this global scope code. Well, during execution, there's no concept of global scope code. Like you don't know when that's actually going to fire. So it becomes really difficult other than doing obnoxious like set timeouts in order to wait long enough to get it. So that bridge isn't perfect, but it works. It made like a framework. Things that do have a global attachment, like where you end up getting a window.a frame or whatever. I used it with Anyang, I believe, as well, the voice library, so that basically if the library is attached to window, this little bridge goes off, makes sure it's attached to the page, sets a promise, and then when the promise is completed, meaning that like it attached to the page, it fires an event. So then you tell your code to basically listen for like Anyang has been correctly added type of a thing to get around the timing. So, but we compile, if anyone asks, all of our code in our build routines does compile to all of these formats, but we never use them. So it's why if you look in our the root of any of the elements, you'll see like I think it's like .amd. What is it, like A11Y GIF player? Yeah, so there's A11Y GIF player .amd.js, .es6.js, just the normal.js, and then .umd.js. So we'll never use those other ones, but it's kind of best practice to include them, especially for like these historical purposes or people wanting to mash them into build routines that are not the same as ours.
Yeah. So that means that you got Storybook fixed in WC Factory.
It does mean that I got Storybook fixed. So would anyone like to see Storybook?
Yes.
Okay. Share desktop here. Okay. So the way you execute Storybook, let me make sure I have VS Code closed because it'll get mad, is I can do yarn start. And now an immediate caveat with this, and I'll have to see if I can change this now, but I might not be able to. If you see when yarn start runs, it fires bash script pre-install. So that's the thing when we do a yarn start, or sorry, when we do a yarn install, that's the thing that undoes all of the node module symlink craziness that makes this thing be optimized. I was finding before, if those are all there, that Storybook gets lost in itself, basically. It just keeps spidering those node modules and it never finishes. So now, as a result of, I have no idea why this works. I fixed, I've searched for some cryptic error, found a dependency that we updated that that is called like emotion. It's a React thing. I don't understand what it does. Do you know what it does, Potter?
No, I was looking into it this weekend too, and I couldn't understand what it was
and
for.
It jumped from like 0.10.1 to like 13.0. something. And like I had updated the dependency because it was like, I don't know, it's a full version. And then in the Storybook issue queues, there's a thread about like, this breaks everything. It's like, sweet. They're like, it works in Storybook 5, which is an alpha. It's like, you guys, you just released Storybook 4. What the hell? Okay. Anyway, so this is our element catalog. Now, some of these will break stuff. For example, I don't know why, but like the outline player, like if I go to it, I'll just force it to break. So if I go to outline player, I immediately get like white screen and some weird error. I don't know why. But it's just very specific ones. I think it might have to be honestly, in Outline's case, it might be that we use MobX and there might not be, Outline Player. I don't actually know if it can function by itself anymore.
Yeah.
Because of how much we've been refactoring it. So, let me see, like CMS hacks or something, if those do anything. Yeah, okay, so that one busts too. That's fine. GIF player I know works. There we go. So there's GIF player, and then I get my knobs and my little viewport stuff at the bottom, which is pretty nice. All right, so I can see what does this look like on a pixel. And we'll do portrait. And then I can let me find a GIF. There we go. So there's my little GIF. I just pasted it in. I don't know what the address is, but so I mean, it is, updating these, right? So that you can mess with whatever the item is. So like accent card, image source, sure. I don't. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if all of these that actually did anything meaningful. How about video player? Does that work without making us mad? I'm not sure. Might need the knobs fixed. So the knobs are generated by. Let me find that file. In each of the repos. There we go. So like video player. So go to video player, and then it's this video. It's the name of the element .story.js, which then what it's attempting to do is it's attempting to go through the like whatever it is .properties, if that exists, and then it's attempting to loop through and build those automatically. And then it just leaves a generic like, hey, here's the slot area inner contents. So this is the pretty generic boilerplate for these. And I'm sure now that it actually works that, Nikki will want to take some of them and actually make them have meaningful things. But the default case this is taking the demo. So whatever you put in the demo is going to get injected below the live demo, and the live demo is pegged to whatever the knobs are. So I think there's a reference missing that would make this bottom part work. I have to look. But if this part would work, this thing would be pretty badass.
Yeah.
It's in place. So like, honestly, the hard part is fixed because like Potter knows, Nikki would be like, I want the storybook. And then I would go, hey, I put everything in place for storybook and I read the documentation, and then I run this command and it'd be like cryptic webpack error. Okay.
Works in React.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be like that kind of a thing. Hey, there's the editable table though.
Whoa.
Ooh.
Right, and I did nothing for that. So that's the funness of
Whoa.
I think it might be the ones that have source and stuff.
Yes, it's the ones that it's whichever ones have don't have that wrapping tag to make it show up. Let's do a CSV. There we go. So I mean, this is a pretty.
They don't have the source in it. Which one is that?
It would be anything that doesn't have, Nikki, you mean like that tag that shows the like copy and paste this thing or whatever, right?
I was thinking the ones that, for a field needed a source for something, like whether it's an image or a video, and that's why it's like showing nothing.
So like
yes.
If the knob needs some sort of, some sort of source, yeah.
Well, so I think these other ones aren't showing because, there we go, like demo snippet, I don't have the reference. I need to figure out how to get that reference to be compiled into everything.
Oh, I see.
If demo snippet is compiled into everything, then it should be rendering just like the Polymer demos when you do Polymer serve. So that's what it's drawing from.
Oh.
So this area is the Polymer serve source, like when you do a demo, so that I don't want us making demos specific to Storybook, right? Was immediately my concern as I was even seeing that this is possible. So in in these, more boilerplate files, there it is. Template require raw load of demo index.html. And then it tries to match the area between the body tag of that demo. So then it's basically taking the inner HTML of whatever the demos are, and it's just dumping it into here. So I would, if we end up modifying these, I would try to leave this piece alone. But then the knobs is where it gets a little dicey, because it's trying to pretty much guess. It's like, oh, the video has a source tag that says string, put one there, right? So it's going to generate options that it might not be supposed to generate. And other times it's not going to generate anything because this object doesn't resolve correctly or whatever. But
so would you say that this is a good boilerplate starting point, and then you should really go in there and manually specify these properties?
Yeah, especially so I think for like simple ones, it's probably fine. Like there's the ELMS LN loading one. So like this generated these just fine. I can type large and it'll influence that. And I can do blue. I think it's blue, text blue. I don't know what the heck they are. Simple. I don't know what these simple color things are. But the other important thing to note is in Storybook, these are not data bound to this area. So what it's actually doing is whenever there's a change here, it is repainting this area, which is it's probably not a big deal, but it's a subtle difference, right? You could get into some data binding issues or something wonky. I'm not positive. Like if you have a field that's computing another field, and as you're typing one, it could, screw up.
Rip it out.
Yeah, it could end up ripping it out. Not everything is in here. It's like everything that made sense based on the way it was being pulled in is here. Part of why Storybook wasn't working is we had a lot of elements that, especially like Nikki's made a lot of like helper utility elements and things that really don't have any ability to showcase on their own. And so I had to go through the notices and rip some of them out. So
do you just remove the Storybook file from the element, or?
Yeah, so if you just delete the Storybook file, then it's fine. I mean, it's boilerplate, right? It's something we could easily copy and paste and regenerate. The WC Factory tooling to make a new element is stamping that boilerplate in. So at that point, you do whatever you want with it. There we go. Stop note's a good one. Right, because this is going to be updating in real time with something that's rather simple to witness what the change is. But then you could say, oh, well, when you're in Hacks and you do the icon thing, you actually have the icon picker, right, Nikki? So like this could be a good, oh, maybe there's a way that we could showcase these so that this is a little more user-friendly, because right now this is obviously super developer-friendly, right?
Yeah.
Chuck knows that it's stop node icon, and then I don't even remember what they are after that, but it's like okay icon or something.
So after we get
one was
this,
called warning or something.
There we go. Yeah, so you would have to know what those are. So
after we get this all cleaned up, in the LRN Web Components repo, is there a way to redirect demo to this?
So I think what we would probably do is probably make a separate repo. There's a command that's in, I haven't run it yet, but there's a command here called yarn run storybook-build that I think I included, that will take this site and it'll compile it to a flat file so you could post it somewhere. And then I don't know, Potter, if we have any preference over whether that should ship with the repo. I feel like it shouldn't ship with the repo. I feel like we should just post it on GitHub, throw it up on GitHub pages, and then in the LRN Web Components thing, we could put a link to that. Do you think that satisfied what you're talking about, Nikki?
Yeah, basically, I just want to have a way to point to some of these individual components. So that we can say, look at this thing that we did, and have a really good spot like we used to when it wasn't a mono repo.
Yeah, and the that's probably the out-of-the-box functionality that people would be looking for with WC Factory, because it's really helping you to put together your entire library, and Storybook is the best way of visualizing that whole thing.
Well, and it's kind of becoming a de facto pattern library for us then too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then thinking about how we want to name these things, and we had talked about breaking these down and trying to identify whether they were atoms and molecules and whatnot, so that we could treat this like our pattern library.
Yeah, that's another good point I wanted to mention, Nikki, is in these, what the default is doing is it basically took the name of the file, or sorry, the name of the element, and it just said like break off the last piece of the camel casing and just make it stories of that. So it was completely intended to just be like, this is in a place, right? But if I said like atoms and save, this should rebuild automatically. I'm not positive. I haven't done it in a while. There we go. It rebuilt automatically. I didn't even reload, right? And so now there's video player.
Gotcha.
So that's the stories of equates to that. I think you can nest stories of a thing into another thing, but I'm not, you'd have to dig into the docs on Storybook as to how to do that.
So this is one of those Nikki to-dos.
That would be a good Nikki to do.
Now that you got me this.
Well, yes, I got you the impossible part that I had no idea how to do. And then, yeah, you're really good at naming and grouping those things. There we go. I love it. I mean, like, look how cool that is. Like, this is when it actually works correctly, right? Like, I just deleted the word atoms, hit save, and then it updated in the background there. Yeah. Like keeping my search term in place even.
That's awesome.
I mean.
Yeah, that's hot module reloading.
Yeah, I mean, this is the power of when you have Webpack workflows working correctly.
Yeah.
So
if the workflow is I'm working on word count, would I still CD into the word count element and run yarn watch while this Storybook is running?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe you would do that, but then you wouldn't have the little Polymer Serve demo space open.
Yeah.
Is probably what we do. The other thing is we might want to just keep working in the little spaces and then almost like verify in the whole thing after. Mm-hmm. The reason being the hot reloading with the modules, if you put a syntax error in your word count, you're going to bork this whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's not broken for good, but it's going to be broken for while you're working on it, and it's going to be confusing because I've seen the Red Hat developers on Patternfly express that. I think Kendall might have brought up that that's a current deficiency. It was a deficiency months ago when we forked from their process, so I'm sure it's still the case in our setup, that if you have a syntax error, the whole thing goes up in smoke, which you can immediately see why this took so long to construct, because we have 163 elements that needed perfect syntactical accuracy when all four of us have built them.
Cool.
So
that's awesome.
Yay, a thing. But yeah, I think this would be a good way of testing, and like you said, Nikki, making it a more real, that we're actually doing stuff and pointing people to things.
Yeah, because when I get that rich text editor done and the table editor done, I really want to be able to tweet that shit.
Yeah, so the publishing options could just be either you just have a script that builds out Storybook and then publishes it on the GH Pages branch, or publishes it to a whole new repo.
Yeah, I would probably just do a whole new repo. I don't know. I don't see an advantage to the publishing to GH Pages part of it. I don't have a preference on it either, but
yeah.
But then it would also simplify because we could just do whatever that other thing is master, and then tell GitHub Pages to just ride off of master so that we can just push the files up there.
Yeah.
I think it's I have noticed, especially with the Hack CMS workflow of like switching over to GitHub Pages, that invokes a lot of room for error, right? You switch to GitHub Pages, you don't realize that you did that. You do a git pull, you pull all the assets from the other thing in, and you go like, what the heck was this?
So that's awesome.
Any other questions on this before we move on to something else somebody else did?
No.
Oh, see, you can still get stuff like that. That's fun.
Similar thing that I saw on the Twitters was somebody posted a WC library starter.
Yeah, what was that?
Did
you play with it?
Yep, I played with it. It's pretty cool. It's
why don't you share that then?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a link.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So WC Library Starter, I think Justin Vignani or somebody had retweeted it. It's pretty much the core of what WC Factory is doing. It's set up based on Lerna. It is a monorepo, but it's just a boilerplate. So there's no tooling for scaffolding stuff out like we have.
Gotcha.
But it uses Storybook, and I responded to the guy and I said, hey, this looks pretty much like what we're doing. We should talk. And he's like, oh yeah, that looks pretty much the same. So there might be able to at least maybe pull in his boilerplate as like an element library in WC Factory. I think this is based on, actually, let me head over to my desktop and see if I have it here. Okay. All right, so whenever you, out of the box, you just git clone it, and then you yarn install at the top level, and you have a factory in essence. So start you out with one button, and then basically you just copy and paste that button and rename that button into another element. So like I made a header element here, and it's using TypeScript to go and compile the JavaScript, the Sass, and the HTML in some cases. Or not the, yeah, is it doing, no, I guess it's not doing HTML. But the JavaScript definition and the Sass it's using TypeScript for. It's also using decorators, which this is big in other libraries. Everybody's going this direction. There's a new new JavaScript ES 2019 support for these decorators, which I don't fully understand what they do.
Is 2019 is that ES7, ES8?
ES7, I believe.
Okay. I mean, I know they do the dating based on year, and you said 2018, so I mean that might be ES8 even.
I think it's 2019.
Oh.
Which I thought was ES7, but maybe I'm wrong. That's the thing that people throw that around, so I don't know if they know exactly what like 2019 is.
Okay, well, sorry. What does it do?
I have no idea. This is total speculation too. So, but let's see here. let's see if I can find an example. Okay, so like read some stuff, yeah, it's hard to see what's going on here. So I think it's a way of you to say like, this is my decorator, this write stuff, and it's pointing to a constructor or a function or something. And so you just decorate it with like, hey, if you want to use it, you can use it anywhere in another class just by using write.
Oh.
And so then you just put this write on something else.
How the heck does it?
Or maybe I had that.
That's
yeah. So you just see this in a lot. Like if you want to create a custom element, you do this, and that does the whole custom element definition, as well as maybe some other stuff like does the constructor for you or something. I don't know. Talking out of my element here, but like MobX is fully moving to decorators. So all of their documentation is really tough for me to read because it's in ES7 style. But anyhow, so this library uses that. And it uses Storybook, so I should be able to just say yarn Storybook. Oops. Maybe I have to install it. Yarn start. So looks pretty similar to what we have. And then you got your button and your header here, which I've included an LRN button. It's not Storybook. There we go. Maybe I broke it. Oh, yeah. Maybe it takes a little bit to compile. But anyhow, so it looks pretty similar to everything that we have. They keep their stories in a separate folder where we include our stories right along with the element. So that's one difference. And then the main difference is that it's using TypeScript to pull in these assets and combine them into one element. And I think whenever you compile the Storybook, it puts it in this folder here. So along with our discussion that we just had, they keep the entire Storybook site, the build out in the same repo. So I think the interesting thing is that he's using OpenWC elements, or at least configuration.
Their configuration libraries, yeah.
And I thought he was even using their actual elements.
Oh, I didn't know they made elements.
Like a boilerplate element.
Oh, I gotcha.
I think, could be wrong, but I think this is their boilerplate element. And what WC is OpenWC. Brian knows more about it than I do. I was just kind of catching up on it. But it's a sort of another split off community from from the Polymer community. Is that right?
Yeah, they are in the Polymer Slack channel with a, channel for OpenWC. But I think their goal is to try and promote web components in a way that doesn't just make React people go, "You mean Polymer, shut up." So yeah, exactly. I think it's trying to be much more holistic and like here's recommended ways of doing stuff, a lot less heavy-handed, like, slot things into your current workflow. Here's how to leverage lit. Here's how to leverage some of these other things, but not really pushing or trying to seem like it's not really pushing an agenda other than adopting stuff that's involved with web components.
Yeah.
Now, I feel like that could have been done on the webcomponents.org site. I don't know why this has to be in a separate place, but whatever.
Yeah. But they're working on providing some build tools to make working with web components easier. So like they have this OWC dev server, which is pretty cool. Let's play around with. And I'll add this. So basically you add that dev server as a dependency to your project. And then I'll just make a little index.html file. And great. Yes. Throw that in. All right, and then just add this little start server to your scripts file or scripts property.
So I think immediately, like, the comparisons will be WC Factory is a very rigid, heavy-handed way of saying work exactly like the ELMS Learning Network team.
Mm-hmm.
And this stuff is attempting to be, here's all the recommendations that group basically pulled into one thing, but you probably don't need everything that they're describing.
Right.
Because like our tooling was great for people that have no experience with this industry at all, but probably a bit too much other than for people to cherry pick different ideas for people that are established in this industry, whereas OpenWC will be great for people that already have tooling workflows and have a lot of this knowledge base down.
Yeah. And the website's just a really good resource for pointing developers towards, like, I know nothing about web components, or I know very little, but I'm more developer centric. Where do I go? This is a great website just to get your feet wet, because they cover a lot of different areas. So
cool.
So one other thing that I wanted to show just real quick, because I'm still wrapping my head around it, is React hooks. So have you guys heard about React hooks at all? It was announced at ReactConf like last year, and it really got the React community very excited, because it's a way for you to, without using classes, make reusable functionality. So sort of like behaviors.
Or like the decorators thing then? I mean,
yeah, kind of.
At some level?
Yeah. Yeah. So they, like, a lot of their examples are, how do you share state? And we run into this a lot, is like, how do I so I have an editor toolbar and I have an editor body area, and they both have, like, whenever you build them with the knowledge that they both have edit states, but they're not linked together yet. Like, you have to combine those into a higher order app that connects the toolbar's edit state with this body area's edit state. And that's still difficult to do in web components, like, without a framework behind it. So, like, Brian has solved this problem using the using singletons, to where you say, okay, well, I both need to subscribe to this higher order edit state. So I'm going to shoot an event up the stack that says, like, hey, I need this edit state. Something catches it, adds it to the list of pieces of components to notify whenever its edit state updates. And that's how we can distribute the state around. But that's still difficult to do at scale. So this is sort of another approach. Would be, you create these functions that contain state information, and other components, other child components, can pull those functions in and use those functions in their components. And whenever they get combined in an app together, they just sort of automatically know about each other's state. That's very confusing, and I probably didn't explain it at all how it is. But, like, if you, so this is an interesting example here. For one, whenever you create the component, oh, and I should mention, this is Haunted.js. This is the React API, the React hooks API implemented in just a vanilla JavaScript framework. So this works with web components. This guy, Matthew P., he's been pretty prolific in the web component community. So let's say that we had this concept of like a light theme and a dark theme. So there's a theme state that a bunch of our elements sort of have this context of. So what you would do is a higher order component would create a context, and they would create a theme context. All right, so this is just a constant right now. And then you use this custom elements define. So you create a new element and you call it a theme provider. And then you pass it the context, and then you specify it as a provider. So this is going to provide consumers with this state. And likewise, you create another tag that's called theme consumer, which is going to be on the lookout for theme providers, or that might be the other way around. Theme providers might be on the lookout for theme consumers. All right. And then in your app, it would look something like this. So you would have at some top level a theme provider, and you'd be getting this, whatever the value is. So in this case, right now it's dark. And then down here, you have these theme consumers that sort of just tap into, hey, whatever the theme context is set to, I just need to use it. So wherever my closest provider is going to tell me what my theme should be.
So is this kind of like a source of truth versus like, hey, I'm seeking truth on this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't fully understand what the side effects of this would be, because this is an interesting demo. If you run it, because they're sharing the same context, but it depends which provider is giving it to you and when. Let's see here, where's my dev server? State not defined. Yeah, that's right. His demo was not working. Okay. So we have this consumer, which is getting its state from this provider. But then we have this provider that is basically that's inverting whatever the current theme is. So if the global context is saying it's light, then it's going to switch the theme to dark. And all the child consumers are now going to render, in effect, the wrong state, but on purpose. So if I switch it to light, then this thing shows dark. If I switch it to dark, then this thing shows light. So it's interesting. And like on the surface, this seems to solve what we've been going for. Like this is a very easy way to compose state together in your application.
And you mean what we're going for with the issues we've been having with the manifest, passing it around in Hack CMS and the MobX stuff?
Right. So the problem that I think we have that other frameworks don't really take into account is other frameworks, like whenever you go to build a React or an Angular app, you're just building an app. But what we're doing is we're building these reusable pieces of functionality that are going to be distributed in other apps that we have no clue about. And on flip side, we're building apps for other people to implement. So like we're using components to build super abstractive frameworks that other people just tap into. And like, you don't get that concept in Angular or React or anything like that. So for instance, we have Hack CMS. Hack CMS has the notion of edit states and routing information. And we say, here are these big top level components. You build your little theme components and you build themes off of that and you plug them in to our higher order components. Well, that's like really tough because how do we compose our state with their state? Does that make any sense? And I could be getting this totally wrong. This might not even be an issue, but that's like where my...
No, I mean, that's kind of why, isn't that why, people have adopted React and Redux, is that teams will go off and build the, card area or whatever, and the card is going to be used in a flyout menu, and the flyout menu team is working on that, right? Like that, yeah. All these teams are working on these pieces that don't really have any concept of one another. And so this probably makes sense in that same way, even if they're not, if your average React app is not being built in this hyper modular way for reuse outside of the app, it is still being pretty hyper modular, development if you're working at like Netflix or whatever.
Yeah. So anyway, it's super interesting.
So are you saying you're going to switch from MobX over to this now so you can play with another state management methodology?
No. I need to reach out to Matt because I can't get some of the demos to work. Like I started building some examples and I couldn't get them to work with Haunted. So I must not be understanding some stuff appropriately. But yeah, MobX is still the simplest, easiest way to put state management in your app. So it's tough to move away from.
True. I mean, it is getting better. Like every time that you push up more stuff that's moving things over to MobX, like it's improving the state handling, like when I switch themes and stuff. I mean, there's still some edge case types of things that exist, but
yeah,
it's looking at the way that you did it when I then wired it into some button the one time. It was like, oh, okay, this makes it a lot cleaner.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you have to go around and gut everywhere that we were handing that stuff around.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if you ran through the different hack CMS elements and disabled all the one-way data binding for manifest. Like, don't pass it to anything.
Yeah.
And then like inside of outline menu or whatever, it's fine if it passes it, to map menu.
Mm-hmm.
But that if you got the passing of that data around, it will basically, then whenever you hook it back up, we're forcing ourselves to tie it into MobX instead of get lost in these little copies of.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It's also got to be more performant, I would think, if you're referencing one object versus using the Polymer data binding system, to keep passing clones of this object around to manage them.
Yeah. It's just 100K. That's it.
Well, so now it's not.
Okay.
So we're not going to talk about that here, but it's not 100K when you compress it correctly. It's like 23.
Yeah.
There is an issue in the Hacks the website that does indicate something like it's internal to MobX saying like, hey, when you compile this, you should use this flag.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know what it's something that says, hey, I want to use this in production. And then when you go to compile it, it'll make it even smaller.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll take out developer messages or whatever it is that it's also including, but
yeah,
it's not what it was before when I said, what the heck did you put in this project that's enormous?
And I guess we'll just note, so like Nikki and Chuck, the MobX was our state management solution for passing like routing and manifest information around. So the manifest is hacks load site.json, and it refers to that as manifest. So in all of our elements, we get this manifest property. And so MobX was the most efficient way for us to get that manifest state and some other state around some of our sub elements, like into the theme. So the idea is that whenever you go to create a hacks theme, you import hacks site-store, which is the state store, and then you can state store. You get all your liquor.
Get all the liquor there in PA.
And then you subscribe to changes on that object. So I can even show what it looks like, or Brian can show us what it looks like real quick.
Nope, you can, because I didn't make it. I just defer to you and say, hey, fix the state, because I don't understand any of this right now.
I say join the club. Let's see here. All right, in Hacks Elements. So inside of Hacks Elements, Hacks CMS Elements is where we have the bulk of our Hacks CMS functionality. So one of those is the Hacks CMS store, which puts together an object that has manifest information. We're going to put edit mode information in it. It's going to contain what the current active item is, and then location, which is all of your router information. So what that looks like whenever you use it is, if I look in overlay or outline player. So this outline player is a Hacks theme. So I'm going to look in source. If I go to the top, I'm going to tap into the Hacks store by importing the store object from Hacks Elements go inside lib, and it's hack CMS site store. And I need two functions from the MobX library to tap into changes on that store, and that's auto run. And then sometimes you'll need this to.js, which basically converts some objects in the store from like observable properties to an actual JavaScript object. So I'll show you what that looks like. So in your ready function, right here is where you're telling Hacks that you want to set this component up as a theme. And then right after this, I have these auto run functions. And what auto run does is it's this magic MobX function that takes a look at what you're trying to get access to. So in this case, it's store.router manifest. And it will auto run this function. It will execute that function every time that MobX notices a change to store.router manifest. So that's a way of getting around the just infinitely binding property attributes down. Like one-way data binding property attributes. You can cut through all that. So I'll do, once this thing gets a little bit more fleshed out, I'll do a video on tapping into the store.
Cool.
Yeah.
What do we got next here? We got any workflow stuff that you wanted to talk about, Chuck / Potter, on the Hack CMS side, or anything, Nikki, that you wanted to bring up?
So last week, Chuck and I sat down and we were just going to tackle a simple project to see how WCF Factory and Hacks CMS, like what workflow would be best to just build like a very simple brochure, like one-page site, basically. So yeah, we were talking through what the best way of doing it. There's like an infinite amount of workflows that you could do. So you could do, you could start a new Hacks theme, like we did with Outline Player. So we could use WC Factory to spin up a whole new element. And inside of our element, we could start scaffolding out a Hacks theme that would look like our one-page brochure site. And then we could start abstracting some of the static functionality from that into some sub-elements. That's one way of doing it. You could do it where inside of Hacks CMS, you could start working directly out of index.html, although we decided that's probably not the best avenue because index.html has some sophisticated magic that's happening in there that you wouldn't want people futzing around with.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, so you mean as far as getting new dependencies in there? Into that piece of it? Because ideally, we would have a build routine that points to like local user customizations.js or something, right? And then you would just import all your stuff in there.
Yeah.
So it's tangentially related to this, but I was working on not sleeping last night for no reason. And during not sleeping, I worked on improving the way that Hacks does its like dependency tree, or Hacks CMS rather does its dependency tree to spin up a site, because I want a page speed score, or sorry, a lighthouse score that doesn't make people want to vomit. like previously, it wouldn't even complete the tests. So that's how slow it was. So you tell me if this is in the neighborhood. So where's my, sorry, I got the wrong window here. Here we go. All right, so there we go, build.js. So I started mocking, so what's happening in Hack CMS to get those files in the first place is I run Polymer build. I've got a symlink over to LRN web components. So when all of us update LRN web components, I pull it down. It basically is tricking Hack CMS locally into thinking I've got all those dependencies. I run Polymer build and it hits this file. And then this file helps it find all the things, so it compiles everything. And then we ship the compiled version. So that's great for getting everything, getting all the dependencies assembled, but it's not great for front-end performance because then basically the trick in index.html is telling this file to load. So like if we look at, where are you? Index.html. The trick he's referring to is there's build ES6, and then this is the front end, hey, figure out which version you should load. But you see it's loading build.js. And so build.js has been compiled off of stinking everything, right? And so it's really heavy. So what I started untangling last night was that. And then, there we go. So build.js I split into build-full.js and then build.js. And so build-full.js imports build.js. So I make sure that whatever is the minimum requirements to get the front end to spin up is still actually compiled into everything. But that this has everything that we would actually ever need, right, potentially, so that then if it's lazy loaded via dynamic import, it, you know, still shows up. Or like in the case of themes, right? So if I don't know what theme, if I don't include this, we don't compile those themes. We do a dynamic import of your theme and it goes, shut up, I never knew about that. So part of this is like compiling everything and it just sits there on the server. And then if it's requested, then it happens to be there. So then in build.html, which I still run Polymer build, it works the same way, but it references build full, which then is going to ensure that all these assets, right, which there's more than than what we use and everything, right? Even like the listing page for the front page, right? Because you don't need to write. Previously, we were bootstrapping that into every page. That's pretty big. So build.js now. And now let's take this away because I have come up with a methodology by which we won't need this. This is what will be blocking the initial load of the site. It's these two elements. And now they cascade and they, you know, include some other stuff. But once I make it so that these are the, you know, your specialized elements in the page. But once I implement it that these get lazy loaded, you're going to see this time to first paint collapse even further. But now if you do hackstheweb.org, let me make sure I have the assets and I'll hit refresh. Come on, you. It's a stupid GIF. I had to put a dump truck GIF on the first page. The lighthouse score, which I might have sticking around here. Yeah, so like this wouldn't even finish before, like at all. So the fact that it went from won't finish to actual scores and a 20%, which first contentful paint went from like 15 seconds to 3 seconds. So while still 3 seconds is pretty bad, right? It's still in a world where it's pulling in all of these. If it doesn't have to wait to pull all of these in, it's going to get even lower. So just doing some minor refactoring on that stuff. If you look at the network, there we go. DOM content loaded in 1.48 seconds. The fastest time I could get before was like 3.5. And you see it keeps going because it's kind of dynamically importing other stuff. But you get that first paint a lot faster, which is, you know, ridiculously important. Not to mention there's less data transferred. So there we go. So after I have the files in cache, there's 242K transferred, which is basically those GIFs, like, to be perfectly honest. If I do a full on, I have to get about 600K to get the site to spin up. And that's currently, right? Because that's spidering all those other files that I actually don't really need to get to show you the thing. So I'll be curious what this ends up looking like with the methodology that I'm going to put in place. The reason I say all this, right? If we made some kind of like your custom changes file, and the your custom changes.js, maybe it lives in like _config, which in Hack CMS is like here's, stuff specific to you. So if you had to put your assets under here, you could just develop whatever the heck you wanted. And then if we forced there to be an initial, like, instead of this, it would be something like, it wouldn't be dot build, it'd be /config/my custom build, or my custom elements, or whatever.js. And then if we force there to be a file there so it resolves correctly, right? That then that'll compile it. And then if it's blank by default, then you start adding in your import references, and you can do development kind of on top of Hack CMS normal way of doing it. And then we tell people, well, you run Polymer build, put your files in here, do your testing, run Polymer build, add to package.json, and voila. You haven't impacted core, right? You still have it in this, like, the area that you're modifying stuff, but now you can make sure everything's properly compiled, so it'll work, and then still maintain really fast front-end performance, which is something that I haven't emailed to myself as to how to do, but basically I think we can trick Hack CMS into dynamically loading the elements at runtime, so that as you select a page to load it, analyze what just came in, look at what the definition sources for those are, and then dynamically load them, which is a trick Stencil sort of does, Stencil.js. It doesn't exactly work that way, it's my understanding, but it's kind of like whenever an element gets appended to the DOM, that it's hijacking some global function to say, like, oh, here's your definition, and then it goes and imports it, like, right then.
Yeah.
I don't entirely know how. I wonder if they define the elements, and the definition basically has like this little prototype that unpacks, and you get the whole element via the actual reference. Like in the constructor, maybe, that when the constructor is executed, that it actually dynamically imports the definition, but that by default it has like these just blank definitions of everything. I don't know how they would do it otherwise.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at it, but like that's the only, because I know it's a big performance advantage Stencil has, is that the elements kind of dynamically pull in their definitions when you request them. But I don't know how the heck that's possible.
Like they just have definitions that do the imports, and then whenever the other definition comes back, it sort of redefines the element, maybe. I mean, that is, I'm pretty sure there's hooks in not hooks, whatever they are, classes in the browser for defining elements to kind of undefined elements. So I mean, you could almost have a definition that when the constructor is called because someone put the tag on the page, it checks if it's the real one. Well, no, it wouldn't even have to. It undefines itself and then defines itself as the new import. Yeah.
So that then the future request for it, I don't know. That's a guess. But does that seem theoretically viable for adding new elements in Putter?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going to explore this more, but
yeah, definitely. I would like to explore if we could keep the custom elements at the sites level instead of the global config level.
Okay.
Because you're going to have hyper-specific elements that you wouldn't want loaded in other apps or other sites.
True, but this also this also wouldn't be loading them. This would be more so just compiling them.
Okay.
So then we would have to come up with a way of doing the dynamic loading.
Yeah.
That absolutely, that would still be an issue. But Nikki, you want to show something?
Yep.
How do I stop sharing the screen? No.
Up top.
Right. Oh, there it is. It was hiding it. All of your lovely faces were covering the bar.
Let me share mine then. Share screen. Blow this up. Can you see it?
Colors.
All right. So I've been doing the hacks wiring of simple colors to our components. And you can see now that when we change accent color, it will change in hacks preview. We can toggle from light to dark theme. I went back through all of our items that were using the old color system and the documentation in simple colors so that anybody else can sort of apply that.
Nikki, hold on.
Yes.
Chuck and Potter, can you guys turn off your video? Because Nikki, your thing was just glitching, so that way we don't lose your audio or whatever.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Alrighty. So there you go. This is changing colors. Fly and flipping. And if we go back into the documentation for simple colors, that's now updated, so you can see in my demo space that I can change the color theming. Also added instructions on how you extend simple colors. So simple colors is basically a singleton, but it's also a set of behaviors that you can inherit. So if I were inheriting simple colors, I'm importing simple colors and then extending it so that I can use it. And I can show you what that looks like in an element.
Oh, so that definition right there?
Yeah.
See that export your custom element? Move that to the bottom of the document, because I was getting a whole ton of warnings.
All right.
We did have it listed that way at one time in the tooling, and I've seen Mike made a couple.
This is legacy tooling built, so that makes sense.
Yes. So it still works, but like certain things, especially when you get into like Storybook, it'll complain like you exported something that doesn't have a definition yet, because like it does it right that moment. It doesn't read down the page.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm going to show you what this looks like in VS Code. And obviously the export is going to have to go below. But you can see here is the, I'm inheriting simple colors. I also have to include the simple color style sheet when I'm creating an element. And I've got the simple color behaviors here. And what I'm doing is I can pipe variables, simple colors variables into something. And then that allows them to be themable based on the accent color and the dark properties, which are actually in the simple colors behaviors that we're inheriting. So let me go into accent card and show you. In accent card, I have CSS variables that allow me to set a few things. And one of them is the border color for simple colors, or the border color for the accent card. And so you get this simple colors, defaults theme, accent 6. And what that's going to do is it's going to look at the accent property, and it's going to look at light or dark. And if it's light or dark, the default theme color is going to change, and the accent color is going to change. This number is how intense that color is. So I can now sort of color things in a black and white, and then when they pick the colors, it'll apply. So that accent color, you know, if it's green, it's going to pipe in, well, what's the green at level 6 if we're in light or dark. You can see it in Ali Media Player. I have a ton of color variables to get it to do what I had in the demo. Let me show you in the, let me go back into this and inspect it so you can see what's going on here. So if you look, there are tons of variable definitions, and that default theme would change if I changed this. You can see the default theme is changing, and it's got all of these different color levels. If I switch it from dark to light, it changes the order of these. And that's how it keeps everything accessible, is it's keeping the correct amount of contrast. So right now, you know, if I had something that had a background of default theme accent 1 down here, and I had like dark theme or default theme accent 12, which is like a black, if I were to flip that, because it's all relative, it would automatically flip my colors. And that's how it knows to flip them and make the contrast the right set, is we're using a prefix there, a set of variables. You can see I have all of the color shades documented. So if you were working in this and you were trying to color in an interface for something and you wanted a really bright red outline with white text, you would maybe use red 7 and then the white text would be gray 1. And if we flip that to dark theme, you can see the red 7 gets it a dark text.
And that still when you flip that to dark, that black text on red is still the correct contrast ratio?
So when I flip it, the text color will actually change, because if you notice, my black text is using these gray variables.
Mm-hmm.
So notice gray 1 is black when I have it set to dark theme. If I switch it to light, gray 1 becomes a white. And the colors that go up through 1 through 4 are fairly accessible if you take, if you use 12 as your background text. As you start getting toward the center, those are more intense colors, but your contrast levels are going to be tricky. You're going to want to use larger print for some of those things to get the WCAG AA.
Okay, so is there maybe like an overlay in that middle that you could add of like, don't use these to hit WCAG?
I used to have it in the old documentation, but I can definitely update and say these are good to WCAG level AA. You know, if you're using bold text or text above 18.
Yeah, maybe even just like a column down the left, like the left side, because it's universal, right? It's like the
yeah.
First, yeah. So something like that could be. I'm just thinking.
And part of the reason I did that is so that if you were using those levels, you would have roughly the same amount of accessibility compliance.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I've been working on, and the documentation for how you would implement that is there. And if you wanted to see how it gets hex wired or how that works in an actual element, definitely check out the accent card, because that's probably a simpler element to get you started in how to use this stuff. If you wanted to see what happens when you're going with a component that has child components, then Alley Media Player is like a really robust example of how I hand these variables then down to elements inside my element. If that makes sense.
So the simple color class, that's a Polymer extension. It's a Polymer class that it's extending to. So you get that as well.
Yeah, so the simple color, you're saying like the simple color element itself, or?
Yeah, so like whenever you want to use simple colors, you extend the simple colors class.
Yep.
Which also contains Polymer.
Yeah, it will contain the light and dark components, and there are some functions that make things easier. Let me put this up. Simple color. So it gives you your accent color and your dark, and then should you need the hex codes for some reason, there's colors that gives you that. And there's actually something that would get you the what are all the colors that contrast with something, but I don't have that in the documentation yet, and I probably should. It basically, you give me a color and it'll say here are all the variables that would contrast with that.
I could see that being useful in like a Hacks color picker, that like if you're picking a text color or something, well, you should be picking text color, but you're picking a color and then almost having it generate a little table next to it saying like, hey, make sure, this is accessible based on these.
Yeah, I feel like it's more useful in authoring elements, because the whole point is we don't want people to define down to the color level themselves. We just want them to pick accent color and dark. So I've gone back and forth on, does that need to sit here as a property that everything inherits, or is that more like a utility that exists in the documentation?
It seems like a utility, you're right.
Yeah. So at any rate, that's where I'm sitting with this stuff. You have another call I have to get on, but yeah, that is now how we're coloring things on the fly. And then if we can do something with state management, we could theme everything automatically on the entire site that way and drop those variables down.
That would be amazing.
So,
hey, can you answer one fast question?
Sure. What's your fast question?
Would your recommendation then be, because you mentioned you design things in black and white then, would your recommendation be that we design things in black and white and then more or less point to and say, this is a place for potential accent color, and then you could help us wire those up?
Yeah, so I would design for black and white, because you can definitely get a real feel for the color contrast on that. But in your demo, have some things that have an accent color piped in, just to get a feel.
Cool.
Yeah, the idea being that either way, if somebody switches a color on the fly, they should be similar contrast levels.
Collins will love that, and then he'll just say no colors.
Yeah, basically. Well, yeah, and then Colin will say, well, can't you change these colors?
Yeah, then it'll of course go back.
which you could potentially do, but I don't want to, make that an easy thing to do, because the whole point was I picked like, what was it, 180 colors and determine what their contrasts are to each other. So if Collins wants to do that, have at it.
All right, enjoy your other meeting.
Yep, see ya.
See you, Nikki.
All right, so I had one minor thing, which then I can show her. So have both of you ever inspected the DOM when you're loading the page and you get like 700 plus passive touch gesture notices?
Yeah, it's doesn't stand out, but yeah, it sounds familiar.
All right, so I finally figured out how to fix it.
Okay.
Because if you're inspecting the document and it's generating those notices, when you get to like hack CMS level, it starts to slow the entire site down.
So just the act of logging everything.
Just the act of logging the notices. Now, I mean, if you don't have that open, I haven't noticed any performance change. But so here's I had to really dig through and find what the heck this was talking about. So you can do import set passive touch gestures from this magic settings file in Polymer. Yeah, I mean, we're getting into magic level here. And then you can say set passive touch gestures true, which is setting a global setting so that then anytime something were, Polymer created that has this thing come into question, that it will then make sure that it sets things to be passive touch gestures instead of the original. Where this is coming in is if you say add event listener, whenever someone clicks on this, do X. Mm-hmm. I don't believe it's going to generate that. But if you're just writing in the page like paper button on -tap equals, that the way that they're integrating that is pegged off of this. and that their default behavior is not to use passive touch gestures. Now, I didn't entirely understand the difference between them when I was reading through. I think it has to do with like scrolling performance or something. I don't know if you could like easily scroll and touch something rapidly. I don't, not understanding what it is this does, that this isn't the default. Other than maybe they're taking a very like MySQL type of stance, like, well, it worked this way and we're just going to leave the settings alone. And you can disable it if you want to. I still get them on hacksthetweb.org. But now they're only around the Monaco editor, which is running in an iframe, and I don't.
Oh, gotcha.
You know, if the Monaco editor is not super efficient, I don't particularly care.
It's only for development.
Yes, exactly, and it's friggin' VS Code in the browser. So, but now if you inspect, you'll see. Hit refresh. Like even with this open, like look how fast that started to, set up in the background. Like it's night and day. And then there's where's these passive? There it is. Add non-passive event listener to a scroll blocking mouse wheel, which is a very similar event to what it was claiming. Previously, like if I don't have that flag on, it's throwing like 7, 9, 1,000 level. I mean, and it probably what it is. That's probably a setting that hammers on paper button or something.
Yeah.
Right. So then like every paper button that you've ever defined anywhere probably has that or something. I mean, I'm not noticing. I mean, I didn't notice. Whoop. Let's close that. There we go. I didn't notice any real change. I mean, I wasn't able to hit that right there. So maybe that is related. I'm not sure. Okay. I'll have to see if that broke that when I changed that setting. But I have also been messing with some other stuff.
Yeah.
Trying to just get this to be as fast as possible. Oh, there we go. It is some time. Okay. So that's some timing issue because I probably screwed up the timing. But I mean, everything seems to, I can still click and do stuff. So it's also, if I have that closed and then I do even that, what did I just add? It was a license. So now if I do that operation with the window not inspecting, like look how much faster that just was.
Wow.
I mean, the performance with and without that is pretty dramatic. So I'm not sure what this, I don't understand what this passive touch gestures thing would be about, because it seems that it's related to like scrolling, but scrolling wasn't really an issue before. I did notice that now that I disable that, if I hit like Y headless, did you see that delay and then it scrolled up nicely? It wasn't, okay, here so if I scroll the bottom, and it does like a nice smooth, like scroll back to the top.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So it's getting back to the top of the content.
Yeah.
Before I put that setting in, that wasn't like really smooth. It just kind of like jumped to the top.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I don't, that's again, like, I don't understand what the heck that setting could possibly have to do with that. So.
Well, it was throwing errors on the mouse wheel thing, right?
That is Monaco that it's complaining about with that. But yeah, I mean, it has stuff to do with scroll performance relative to, I don't know. But it definitely, Hacks sets up a lot faster now as a result of that being closed and trying to get the timing down correct as far as the dependencies. I wanted to get your guys' opinion on this, because this was being in the shower and it making it clear to me what I wanted to do with this one thing that has been bothering me. Where's it? Hacks CMS. No, it's in Hacks itself. It was around the code editor. No, sorry, code display. and I had this idea, the code sample. Okay. So I've never done this before, but previously I was referencing the code sample. Well, I had a fork code sample because what we talked about at the beginning that Nikki mentioned. So I'm importing code sample imperatively, and then I'm just forcibly setting Hack's properties. And so the difference is the current auto loading mechanism loops through the things that need to go in the DOM, and then it actually prints them on the DOM to get the attached hooks to fire and then rips them out. But if I'm able to use it imperatively, like if it exports, then I could just import the code, reference the object directly via that exported variable, and then do this. And then the DOM wouldn't need to actually print all those on and rip them off. It would just have the definition.
What's code sample right there? Is that a class?
Yeah, so code sample is the export of, let me go to code sample here.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So class code sample, export, code sample. So then I'm just using the class directly, knowing that it has like a Hack's properties thing that's going to be put on it.
Okay.
And so I'd have to do some detection, right, to ensure that like it has that. But if it has that information, then, I mean, this is operating off of the connected callback. Like generally speaking, you have to actually attach code sample to the DOM in order to read this information off.
Gotcha.
And so does it make sense? Like I could.
Yeah. So the,
because that's how these show up here. Because even if these aren't in the page, I still need to let people be able to make them.
Yeah. So how does it, well, whenever you set up Hack's properties, it throws an event, right?
Well, you set up Hack's properties, and then the way that the event gets fired is, so this is in code sample. It says, when I'm connected to the DOM, set up new Hack's wiring, and then run Hack's wiring setup, which leverages the Hack's properties schema.
Yeah.
It says this schema equals this tag, and it came from here.
Right.
But
yeah,
I could just.
Yeah, because it doesn't really need to know this right there. And
correct. I mean, it's important, right, at some level. But this, so I mean, this was a question that Cassandra had with the pattern fly stuff was, I mean, because I don't know if you saw, I posted that PR like, hey, what would it look like to have a pattern fly element with hacks in it? Like, please don't accept this.
Yeah.
Just saying, like, let's have a conversation. And they said, well, why does it have to be in the attached lifecycle? Because then every attached of everything is going to do that. It was like, that's partially valid. I mean, well, not partially, it is valid. This setup function does check to see if the global singleton already has a definition.
Gotcha.
So then at least it's not firing. You're not just getting events blasting everywhere. It's once.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, I might be able to put in something in that check as well that's like, hey, if this global flag was set, don't fire any definitions. We'll engineer them a different way. And then it would increase the performance of it even further. Like what I'm trying to get at is when you hit refresh on this page, right? So if I hit refresh, you'll see in the bottom left corner, it says Math Jacks. There it is.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because it had to attach it to the DOM in order to leech the definition off. If I don't have to actually attach it to the DOM, it won't invoke all the stuff that is involved in the life cycle. And so even though this is pretty quick, I can get it even faster on long-term bootstrapping because I won't have to put those things in the DOM, take them out each time.
Yeah.
And this won't work for, I don't think this will work for everything. I mean, the class has to be bubbled up, or the class has to be exported, which is not a requirement.
Why would that be a problem though?
I mean, it's not technically a requirement that you export the class. I would also need to know what the class name is, right? I don't know what the heck the class name is.
They would have to have like a standard like tag property on everything.
Yeah, I mean, that would be like, here's the way to do this. Now, the other thing I was thinking, right, because that would be an issue potentially. I don't know what name you exported.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the performance impact of this would be. But so this is going to run, and it's going to do custom element define. Well, there is a window.custom elements.get, and I could do .get on the tag name.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, that's core to the way the spec works. So you can see if something's already been defined.
Oh, nice.
That's part of how that deduping fix works. Is it checks if it already exists in the registry and then ignores it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and now what that'll return to you is like just the whole class object blob.
And so you filter that and stuff. And
yeah, so I'm not sure if I could actually leverage that. Let me see how to just thinking out loud here as you ask that question. So if I did this and then it'd be code sample, right? So that'll give me the class, but I don't know, is that an instance of that then? Okay.
It's
that lets me cheat on it even, so I don't even need it to be exported. Right? Because that's, if I have the tag name, then I could do custom elements.get.
Yeah.
If that doesn't return anything, then I know I need to dynamically import it.
Yep.
Which is sort of what I was doing already. I just didn't do that check.
Yeah.
And then I could just directly access that stuff and not actually attach it.
Yeah.
Which then when the tag does attach, like, because this stuff runs before that, but so when the tag does attach, it won't fire the event because it'll already have a definition.
Yep.
So then I wouldn't need to gut that out of it. And this solves the question that they had of like, well, how would we do this without, they don't want to put it in every attached life cycle. They want to create a way by which a CMS would theoretically pull the definitions in per person, right? Like if you had App Store .json generated and said, what's the auto load list? And you wrapped user permissions around saying, content contributors can only add these 3 elements. Then even though they won't get sucked out of the DOM, right? They're still valid tags, but they won't allow them to actually touch and edit, create new ones, kind of a thing.
Interesting. So they're blocking access just on the tag level, or are they ripping properties out of tags?
It would be like, if you don't get the definitions bubbled up, then Hacks doesn't know what the heck you're looking at, right?
Right.
So you could say like, I want content contributors to have access to those 3 homepage blocks and edit them in this way. But then if I log in, I get all the keys to the kingdom, or I don't get any, right? I mean, it could be like site 1 wants to have that flexibility, site 2 doesn't. And so then I just don't emit the hack schema for those.
So I have seen that in other quote unquote libraries, they're doing web components. They don't do custom elements define in the component.
I have also seen that. Yeah. I mean, do you know why, or you think we should start doing that? Or?
No, that was just probably another approach to solve a similar problem like that. Like,
yeah, I'm pretty sure if you look at Patternfly, I think that Cassandra put that in place that way too, or that team. I don't want to just fully credit her. I know she's done a lot of work on it, but I'm assuming it's for that reason as well. It also helped. People were doing that so you could switch from V0 to V1 definitions pretty quickly because they like abstracted it, right? So then everything's related back to that. That's the relevance. When it was called relevance, I did notice they were doing that in part. It seemed for that, right? Because then they could mix in additional life cycles that they wanted everyone to have without it being a formal class extension. Yeah. It's weird having this conversation. We wouldn't have had this conversation a year ago. I would have been lost completely. So what are you two working on coming up this week? We should probably cap these with like, here's where we're going.
Yeah.
In the event other people would watch these. I don't know if they will, but
probably just we'll probably take a stab at the single page website workflow.
Yeah.
The Hex CMS workflow.
Yeah, I was gonna work through. You tagged me in that Git repo with how to set up a theme, so I was gonna work through that and see if I could get something set up along those lines.
Nice. Speaking for Nikki, I just accepted a PR that she did. She's been working on an element called Rich Text Editor that I just merged it. I haven't checked it yet. I've seen her working on it the last 2 weeks, but it's basically, if you take just the Hacks text editing operations bar, she made that abstracted so you can put it in anything. So effectively, we now have the world's most complex future-facing text editor and the world's simplest, most, ghost replacement-esque text editor as the same organization, both of which are web components, both of which may leverage each other at some point. But I know she put that in, and then she was going to start looking at, and she did some stuff with GridPlate, which I need to check out because GridPlate is screwed up in Hacks. And then I think she was going to start digging into more of the guts of Hacks, like how, from an accessibility perspective, and some of refactoring like the text, because she just made that text editor. I had a text editor, like now we have something to compare and contrast to. Yeah. And I definitely like the way she does buttons. Like she's starting to get really good at that extension mixin thing, which we should really have her talk about that next time, because I want to know how the heck that works. She also had that element now. I've noticed she's using elements that have behavior. It says behaviors in the Polymer element.
Right. So those.
I don't know what that is.
Behaviors?
I meant to ask her, but I don't know. Good. We can just come up with like she runs the next one and answers all these. I'm working on basically going through the Lighthouse report and figuring out how to optimize delivery even further. And then try and start to get into service worker manifest PWA stuff.
Beautiful.
I want to tread lightly on that though, only because if you ship someone a corrupted service worker manifest relationship, you can basically break your site for them.
Yeah. Because you'd have to instruct them how to manually go into their browser and delete this.
Yes. Like I did remember seeing a lot of warnings, and that's why they recommend you don't touch those and you just auto-generate them.
Yeah.
But we can't auto-generate one. I mean, we're not going to have people running tooling. So they're going to have to run a function, and that function is going to have to know what the routes are. And now we know what the routes are, right? Like, so this is the problem, right? The app, if you were to run Polymer build or whatever, it's not going to have any connotation of what your routes are.
You mean on the front end?
In the tooling side, it's not going to know that the routes are being dynamically loaded off that site.json file.
Right.
Now we still know what the routes are. I mean, I'm not doubting that. But we'll want to kind of engineer. I was going to take a boilerplate one that they make and then section off the area where they put in those hash values and like what the route names are, because that's the really critical piece. And then generate those via PHP and just overwrite that section of it when it goes to publish to GitHub pages.
Interesting. So I thought that we'd just be leveraging the service worker to just store all of the element definitions.
Yeah, it does that stuff too. But you have to say like these routes are, I mean, if you run Polymer init and you generate a new one, you can look through and see how it's doing the definitions. You do have to define like these are the routes.
Oh, interesting.
And then it takes the routes, and I think it analyzes the route and says like, oh, this route has X bytes of content, so generate this hash value. Because if those hash values never update is where you get into dangerous territory, where I click on the third page, the service worker checks the manifest because it says, hey, I'm online, and then it hits it and goes, hey, the hashes are the same. You can still keep using the old one, right? Even though it's not really. So those are areas where I really want to tread. I was going to do it on my personal blog that I have up on GitHub Pages branch, just because that's not going to be where that lives and no one knows where it is. Because I don't want to. A lot of this we have been running pretty fly by night when it comes to like pushing out stuff that influences hackstheweb.org directly.
Yeah.
And
this is one that you definitely wouldn't want to do that.
Yes, that one I don't want to screw up. Other stuff where like, oh no, I broke the search thing. I can go and see what's going on there. But that would be a biggie. So yeah, you should look at that tweet about the metrics Fusco sent me, and I'll send you the ones that Joe sent me from BYU because I asked him to compile them for that report we put in. But I mean, I think Joe said it costs less than $500 a year
to run the university.
To run the university-wide content delivery network. So I mean, we can I'm hoping I can make a pretty compelling case in that. We'll see if it goes anywhere. But
awesome.
Anyway.
Well, this was super informative.
Yes. Now that we're not in tooling hell, all of us, we can, start actually doing these on any regular basis. So